So in the first session, I spoke mainly about the general idea of a complete path, which involves both you could say the insight part of it, as well as the relative bodhicitta side, so insight and compassion, loving kindness, those two wings. And I gave some examples of how having some structure to the practice allows us to look into our experience and see, kind of lean in particular ways to cultivate certain kinds of things that we need to cultivate, and to see specific things that be good to abandon. And I spoke a little bit about the long term, joking that either things will go well enough or not well enough, and in either case there will be challenges related to one or the other over time. And one of the challenges is in finding a balance between having such a narrow view of our practice that we don't get refreshed and inspired by additional perspectives. We can wind up with too narrow a view, but we can also wind up with some sense that it's important for us to do a whole lot of different things. And in the middle of that, I think it is good to hear from different teachers. It's good to hear from different traditions. All kinds of inspiration, I think, is really good along the way. But it's good to have some kind of sense of clarity about understanding our own path of practice, so that we understand what we're doing relative to our own practice. And having some sense of confidence that what we're up to is complete. It doesn't need to have a lot of extra parts, but it can be very helpful to have the light shown on our path and our practice from many different perspectives. That can be very helpful. So finding a balance there, I think, is one of the important things long term. Sometimes the light just illuminates things very well, and again it shows up something that we were missing, something that was hiding out in the corners. Something becomes invigorated in our practice. Some obstacle is removed. But sometimes it can also bring up doubts and concerns. That's sometimes what happens. We think, oh, well, I'm not learning about this, or this. So it's necessary then to have some colleagues on the path that you can talk to sort it out. That's really essential. Which is another piece of having a program like the Mahamudra program, where over time that's one of the very rich things, is to have colleagues on the path who have shared a history of teachings, who have even sort of been through the going to India boot camp routine. So they're all the peripheral things that go along with having shared pilgrimage together. It's not intrinsic to the program, but there are just many ways in which having colleagues on the path and having shared experiences, shared teachings, having been there for the same teaching and being able to reflect on it together, it's very helpful. It's another reason that just when we come together here at the center, this is just a sidebar comment, but it's actually good to come and hear teachings that we've heard before, if for no other reason than to be sharing the experience of hearing it with our brothers and sisters in the Dharma. If we are there and we are present with it, we don't know when it might actually come out either directly or indirectly that we can be of benefit to others just by the fact that we're there. So I'll talk a little bit about the structure of the Mahamudra program, at kind of different orders of magnitude of specificity, starting from the most, kind of the biggest. Bokar Rinpoche would often say in general sessions in the Mahamudra program, not just for people who had been through all 3 years or had then gone on to the Yidam section and done all the stages of that. It was said to everybody, even people who had come for the first time. He said, so really if what's been offered here could be a lifetime of practice. Just what was offered in the first year. It could be a lifetime of practice. And when you really stop to look at it, you see how no matter how many years we've gone through, no matter how much, just what we receive in the first year is a lifetime of practice. But to step back to the bigger panorama, there are 2 parts to the program that Bokar Rinpoche was developing. And the first was a 6-year program which involved, kind of the core of it was a progression of, built around the progression of calm abiding, insight practice, and Mahamudra. So that was one piece. And it was considered that the 6 years were that was sort of a minimum to absorb this. And I think pretty much everybody who's gone through 6 years say, still absorbing. There's no question about that. But then Bokar Rinpoche also offered the option for people who had an inclination, an option, so you emphasize the word option and inclination, for people who had the inclination after having completed 6 years of practice within the Mahamudra program, that they could begin a Yidam practice. If people were really inclined towards the style of practice. And there were actually four stages of that. Yeah. And that, you could also say, is another 6 years. So kind of if you were really going at it hammer and tongs, good old-fashioned saying, I wonder what the digital equivalent of that would be. If you're really going at it, 12 years would be a kind of a minimum investment of time to really absorb that. And that within that, it would require this is not a kind of an occasional effort. This is really maintaining a daily practice, or at least a near daily practice, and really being quite present with the practice going along. And that's by way of saying that doing just a stage of a practice at a time, and really feeling the luxury of being able to go into it with some depth and not feel like there was a necessity or an expectation that a year has gone by and I've done the practices I should definitely rush through and get on to the next. It really was designed to provide this kind of sustained progression of practice, so that based on our experience, just as if you were to start out with a physical fitness program, based on the exercises you did in the first several months, something else might be possible in the next several months. So it's designed to kind of unfold that way, based on our opening experience. And the practices that he included, it's very interesting watching the evolution over time as he listened to the experiences of people coming back. What was emphasized? And over time, the core of it for beginning revolved more around the calm abiding practice and a series of practices that were set forward, and less around the formal practice of the mudra, the foundation practices with the prostrations and the Vajrasattva mantra, the uncommon preliminaries, the mandala offering, Guru Yoga, because it was difficult for people to absorb enough of the background and the technical challenge of being able to engage in something that has some ritual element to it. So he shifted the emphasis based on his experience with people coming back to emphasize more the part where people really appeared to get traction. And in the beginning, that was the calm abiding piece. Just mention, having said that there is this progression from the calm abiding to the insight to the Mahamudra, that flows through, that's the progression over years. So if you went to the first year, you would get the calm abiding instructions, and then the second year some insight instructions, and the third year Mahamudra instruction. So that would be the unfolding over time. The other practices would continue throughout. The calm abiding practices, just to go into that a little bit, he came up with a program of calm abiding that uses different objects for the calm abiding. We're very used to using the breath as an object for meditation. And in something that in a certain way has some commonality with some aspects of the four foundations of mindfulness, Bokar Rinpoche suggested using different kinds of objects as a basis for meditation. And to do that, he had a 7-day program of this, so you went through it, and on the first day of the week to use a small called an impure object, but it's just an ordinary object placed in front of you, a visual object, and just to rest attention on that and use that as a basis. So there's an opportunity to gain some experience using that domain of experience as a place where you cultivate calm abiding. And then using the breath, the next day to use the breath. And then the next day was to visualize an image of the Buddha sitting in space in front. So a visualized Buddha is one. There is a more elaborate meditation on the 5 elements with symbols visualized for that for one day. A small dot at the forehead visualized for another day. in the heart, different ways of approaching calm abiding practice, so that there is more breadth to how we rest our attention within different domains of experience. And my sense is that if we'd continued to talk with him, that we probably would have talked to him about the four foundations of mindfulness, systematically using all the domains of physical experience, including sight, sound, to use that, to use the domain of feeling, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, as a place to rest attention, domain of the mind, and basically domain of phenomena as another domain. But the particular calm abiding practices do provide us an opportunity to learn to settle the attention in different ways, more than just simply settling. And part of the progression was to begin the week doing these. There's 6 actually, and then the 7th day, calm abiding without an object. And then as the quarters of the year progressed, to go from 1 day with calm abiding no object, to 2 days, to 3 days, to 4 days, to provide an opportunity for us to build up the ability to just let the mind rest naturally. Along with the calm abiding practices, he also had structured in time for contemplation of the 4 thoughts that turn the mind: precious human existence, impermanence, karma, and suffering, faults of samsara. So that was a clear part of it. And the foundation practices, with the refuge and prostrations, these practices were also incorporated. This used to be, back in the day, I'll just say, back in the day when we had to walk uphill both ways to school, this was the structured program. Mundro practice was the structured program. There was one size, and you did Mundro. There was one option, that was it. And so doing 100,000 prostrations, 100,000 recitations of the Vajrasattva mantra, extended mantra, 100,000 repetitions of reciting the offering of the mandala, and doing the gestures of offering the mandala with a plate of rice, and visualization that goes, and 100,000 recitations of the Guru Yoga prayer. That was it. And Bokar Rinpoche saw that there was great advantages in doing Mundro, but great disadvantages in presenting it in a way where people never got the flavor of the panorama of the practices. So he very much wanted people to have, not just to start out with prostrations and get 10,000 in and find out that you have a gimpy shoulder and kind of that's it for Mundro. That's it for the foundation practices. He was very interested in people actually being able to have some kind of experience with the whole cycle of these practices. And so at first it seemed like, well, we'll go from 100,000, we'll go just 10,000 a quarter. And all this was presented in 1 week, along with all these other practices, the 4 thoughts, some things about taking and sending, sleep and waking yogas, the Chenrezig practice, Tonglen, a bunch of other things, all this in 10 days. And you're supposed to remember how to do the ritual. Not just the first quarter, but the second, third, and fourth quarter. So it was very challenging. So being that his interest was in creating a basis for sustained practice, he said, well, how can we make this more workable? And first, well, let's try 5,000 a quarter, so that the numbers are not so challenging. So, more time allowed to actually learn the practice. And I thought, maybe just let's go back from starting out with Wondro. For people who want to, that's fine, but no pressure. You could start out just doing the calm abiding practice, doing a daily calm abiding practice as a commitment, and to do an annual commitment to do some Chenrezig practice, because the Bodhisattva Chenrezig is very kind of a deep heart practice that Kalin Rinpoche shared, and Bokun Rinpoche also found it beneficial for people to do that practice. And it's a really great practice if we go back more to the how will it actually transform you? The other day, Michael offered the Bodhisattva vow. And in those teachings prior to the vow, he talked about the length of time of the vow, which again, that's not just till I attain enlightenment. That's until all beings attain enlightenment. So that's the time frame. And it's really all beings, not just the ones I think deserve it. And then when we think about the activity of the Bodhisattva, there's all the dimensions of activity, all the levels of energy and involvement, and the possibilities for appreciating what a Bodhisattva actually is. It seems daunting if we start from the perspective of just our ordinary self and incrementally adding skills in our ability to benefit others. And the Chenrezig practice offers us an opportunity not just to imagine we're in the presence of Chenrezig, which is part of the practice, but that we actually are intrinsically Chenrezig. We are. That is at the core our deepest kind of who we really are. And before the 96 retreat with Bokun Rinpoche here in Portland, when he offered the seminar, somebody asked him, well, sort of essentially knowing how the book ends on Mahamudra, there's nothing to do and all this, and it sounds so simple and everything. If it's all really so simple, how come we go through these practices and imagine so many things and do this, and we imagine ourselves with 4 arms and this white radiant body, and why do we do all this? And he just said, because that's who you really are. Which kind of stopped everybody. It was kind of brilliant. But if we really have a chance to sort of sit up close to this sense of being, as though just take this on and not think about it from the point of view of, well, I don't know about doing that. I can imagine being nice to my friends, but there's this individual that I really would have a really hard time being nice to. If we start from this incremental point of view, it's very hard, but to appreciate this, but just leaping into this, no. Let's say it's not my ordinary self. Let's just think Chenrezig. Let's just think the Bodhisattva. How is it to be a Bodhisattva? So it's an opportunity to, through some kind of direct experience, begin to appreciate that Bodhisattva potential and shift our identification from our ordinary sense of limitations to this potential, to shift that. And if we do it over and over again, this has an effect. So Bokun Rinpoche really wanted us to do Chenrezig practice on some kind of regular basis. So he had 100,000 mantras. That was what he hoped people would do in a year. And that's, if you do a couple of sessions, it doesn't take that long to do 1,000 mantras, or a couple of thousand mantras. So a couple of sessions a week it's not so hard. And you can do the brief practice. It's also not so hard. So with the calm abiding and the Chenergy practice, he also gave instruction on taking and sending. There's a small amount of that. And there were a few other specific teachings that he would offer. One that he offered right from the beginning was a breathing exercise for clearing, it's called clearing the residual air. And he offered this because the way he explained it in one seminar was there is this relationship between body, mind, and the Tibetan word is lung. It's sometimes just translated as wind or breath, but it's more than our ordinary sense of air going in and out. It's how basically kind of how energy flows, the patterns of energy in our being. So offering this as a way to begin practice, which actually also kind of helps us shift out of our ordinary sense of kind of a static identity. I feel the way I feel. My body feels the way it feels. And when you do an exercise like the three clearing breaths, it actually shifts how the body-mind feels. So there are a number of pieces, and that it's a brief practice, but it's part of the package of practices. How many people are not familiar with taking and sending or tonglen? A few people, okay. There's a way in which, even though this program, you could say it's self-contained, it really does, it's very helpful if we have some additional background. Of course, if we study the Four Noble Truths and the 6 paramitas, 6 perfections, we study the mind training in some depth, the 4 immeasurables in some depth. And we'll also, within the mind training teachings, we'll find the practice of taking and sending, which is another practice to introduce us to the, you could say, the perspective of the Bodhisattva. And in the taking and sending practice, instead of our ordinary equation, which is, may I get away from and send away all bad things and take all good things to me, regardless of the impact on others, I shift the perspective and think, as a Bodhisattva, I take on all the suffering of beings and offer all that is positive. And again, using that connection between body, mind, and breath, or lung, to imagine breathing out, filling space and touching beings, filling beings with all the positive energy, and being able to actually absorb all the negativity, all the suffering, all the confusion. So again, it's a way to step into the perspective of a bodhisattva, to step into that. So that's one of the teachings. But this is also, it's an example of, though this may be self-contained, it's very helpful to have more extensive teachings, peripheral teachings, and that's something that we've done over the years to provide support for the Mahamudra seminar. Different study groups on the two bodhicittas. Programs almost every year. I think I'll say almost, but even though I'm actually believing it's every year on Tonglen. Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. Always trying to incorporate that. The four immeasurables, we teach on that with some regularity. And that's also, so there are many things that are peripheral supports for the program. It's intended mainly as a personal practice program, but after the 96 retreat, Bokar Rinpoche asked Lama Michael and Lama Tara to lead annual retreats here, and up until the 1 year retreat, we did so. And then the 1 year retreat actually was based on the practices of the Mahamudra program. So that was, we could say, we also did that, though it wasn't open to everybody, only people who could sign up for a year, which is the program that's opened it. So,
with 12 others.
Yeah. And now since we've had Michael and Tara occupied with the 3 year retreat, they haven't had the time to do annual programs, but now with the retreat starting to come to an end, we're looking ahead towards how we might support the program in the future. And my sense is that just as Bokar Rinpoche was very open and interested in evolution in the program, that we will also do some things to make it easier instead of presenting everything in a 10-day slot. And then we would also do some quarterly teachings on the Ngondro practices, because those in particular need more support. It takes more energy and more time, more focus to really sort out how you do them technically, and to how you figure out how to relate to them. Just the mandala practice, the mandala offering, it sounds kind of wonderful at one level, but then when you're sitting there, you're trying to imagine the wish-granting cow. And you're sorting through your memory banks for, like, let's see, the wish-granting cow. No. I don't think I've met one. I don't think I've heard of anybody I've never heard anybody talk about a wish-granting cow. How can I possibly relate to this? So questions like this come up, but then if you go back to this, the fundamental principle of overcoming our, if only I wouldn't actually need to practice, if only I had and then you find out, well, the wish-granting cow gives you anything you want. And there's the field that grows without any, this is the job where you don't really have to work. All these things, it's culturally specific, but I was explaining this during one of the teachings with Eric Fromme, and he says, so you're saying I already have a wish-granting cow? And I said, yeah, we all have these particular brands of if only, but this is just an example of how there are different kinds of support are needed to really go into these practices and make this shift. So presenting the Ngondro practices and providing support for that is one thing, but I think in the future we will probably present some of the pieces of the program in kind of smaller bite-sized chunks to make it easier to step in and take on some of the practices, even if people aren't feeling inclined to really take it on fully. There is a downside risk that I will acknowledge, that if we start to kind of make it into more bite-sized pieces, the Three Musketeers spirit will kind of dissolve, because, I took those teachings, but I didn't take these, or I wasn't available for that, so it will be harder, it'll take more energy and more organization and more commitment on everybody's side to make sure that there's a kind of some coherent sense of momentum as a program of practice. So that's something that we're deliberating right now, is how to make some adjustments that would reflect Bokun Rinpoche's spirit of evolution. That spirit of evolution was shocking. He shocked Lama Michael and Lama Chukyi and Lama Namgyal, who are the two French lamas who actually we have to offer our thanks to them, because they're the ones that actually asked Bokun Rinpoche to do something. We need teachings. We need teachings from a lineage master. Without that, we're kind of sunk. We're just kind of in the doldrums. And please come back to the West and teach. He said, no, it's too much like a rock star tour. You know, if it's Wednesday, it must be Vajrayogini and Belgium, and if it's Thursday, it's Mahamudra in Paris, or whatever. And he never had any idea how it added up. So when they asked for him to do this program, he said, okay, well then you come here and I'll do this program and we'll just see how it goes. And he thought it was very successful. A number of people, he offered these practice commitments, and a number of people did them. He's like, amazing. Okay, well, I'll do it again. And then he said, so for the rest of my life, I will offer you these teachers. So he made that commitment based on the committedness of the students. But we were very used to, in the olden days, to have the Lama just say, well, this is how you do it. And so this, after quite a few years in the program, the beginning of the week, he gathered Michael and Lama Namgyal and Lama Chukyi together, and he said, so tell me what's wrong with the program. And this was shocking. This is not like, what can we improve? He was like kind of throwing the ball as far as you could possibly think. What's wrong with it? And he said, didn't want to hear it. It's really hard to kind of sputter and engage and try for them to flip their heads and think about that. But so he was very interested in continued evolution of this. And so I think it's our responsibility to continue in that vein and see how we can make this work, because I very firmly believe that a structured program of practice is really essential over the long term. It's very hard. It's very, very hard to continue. It's very hard for us as teachers to offer something that really can give the most benefit and the most traction over the long run. So those are some, the calm abiding, the generosity practice, Tonglen, the taking and sending, Wondrom. There are a few other smaller pieces, the 3 round. That's the kind of flavor of the practices. And Bokun Rinpoche would ask for a 1-year commitment. He would not ask for a commitment to finish all of Wondro or to do all that. He would ask for a 1-year commitment. And that is really where the program gets some juice in the long run. Just presenting something and presenting teachings and saying this is possible. It's different when we're engaged from our side. And if we think back to the point when Lama Chukyi and Lama Namgyal actually, on our behalf, even though we weren't there, they didn't ask us, on our behalf, it turns out, they asked for these teachings. They requested the Dharma wheel to be turned for our benefit. So when we take teachings like this, we have to think, well, so if I'm not just dropping in on something that just happens to be offered, I'm actually taking this role of requesting the teachings. And if I take the role of actually putting myself in that, I am making this request. I become an active participant in it, and I have to have some sense of that I'm going to follow through in some way. Otherwise, Why would I ask for them? What on earth would that be about? To ask somebody to spend 10 days of their time so I can kind of watch them sit there in an interesting robe and have the monks run around and do stuff, and then I go back and just forget about it. Now, it really requires a sense of committedness. And in the commitments, we have an opportunity to really follow through. The problem that came up with the commitments is that people would get so wrapped up in them, kind of like a legal contract, a binding thing that if for whatever reason, whether it was some good excuse or some bad excuse, or just finding out that they were karmically disinclined to be able to follow through very completely, when people didn't find that they could meet the commitments, many people felt like they were failures and that they were not worthy of coming to another seminar. And this brought Broken Rinpoche to tears, because the point wasn't to hang some weight over our head to the point where we were just petrified of not making some show of spending the time or reciting things fast enough or doing whatever it took to make a show of following through. He was more interested in that kind of the energy of committedness in our being, the energy of committedness in our practice, where we really could put ourselves into it in a genuine way. And that's the thing that there's a very different kind of sense of kind of the meaning of commitment. It doesn't have this kind of legalistic sense, this harsh sense. In this circumstance, he wanted people to be able to experience that enthusiasm and that engagement, and that was the reason for offering a commitment, not exacting it. I'll say just a little bit about this. For people who are interested in Yidam practice, that practice more to go deeper into the kind of practice that's possible with the Chenrezig practice, seeing ourselves as the Bodhisattva, seeing ourselves as Chenrezig. For people who wanted that, he did teach another series of seminars, beginning with the outer, inner, secret, and ultimate aspects of a particular Yidam, where he found a practice that he thought reflected all the elements that you might find in a rich Vajrayana practice, but it was relatively concise. It's still, for most of us, so many pages, but it's relatively concise. But it does have the different elements that you'll find in a Vajrayana practice, including a feast offering and other things, if you're familiar with it. But it also had the stages of practice, the explicit outer practice, the inner practice, secret practice, ultimate practice. And these work kind of successively with how our sense of appearance in the world and our appearance of ourself arises, beginning more with what we would recognize as, well, I appear like this. And then we'd say, oh, and Chenrezig appears like this. And then we work with that. And as we progress in the stages of the Yidam practice, then by virtue of looking closer and closer at our experience, just how is it that we hold the experience of a projected reality? How is it that we hold the experience of ourselves? How is it that the basic energy of our being is organized and held? How is it that we can shift from that energy being organized around our habitual patterns of kleshas? And what would it be like if that energy was actually just a reflection, a manifestation of profound bodhicitta and insight? What would that way of being be like? So, without going into details of the practice, there's an opportunity to go deeper and deeper into how experience arises, really, and how bodhicitta could manifest, how Buddha activity could manifest. And Suvansh asked some things about creation stage and completion stage. And the creation stage, to begin with, there's a distinction between the two. The creation stage having to do with how it is that appearances arise in our stream of experience, and working actively with that. And this is for those of you who are familiar with the Chenrezig practice, it's like we have all the visualizations, we have the recitation of mantra, we have the activity of the different aspects of the visualization. This all falls into this creation stage, the Kerem. And at the beginning, this is its own section, and then there's the completion stage where all these appearances dissolve back into mind, or they just dissolve. Even back into is too constructed, and then we just rest in nature of mind. But as Bokar Rinpoche said in his book on Chenrezig practice, at some point it becomes clear that there is really no distinction between creation and completion. That we begin to be able to see that appearances just arise as manifestation of mind. And so at this point, then the creation stage and completion stage are in union. But this is some ways out. So it's not... but these things are possible. But even with just the Mahamudra practice, we can go back to the other side. Go back to the nothing to do. If we really go back to the nothing to do, and that arises, and the mind really rests in its own nature, and it's really there's the recognition of that, then there will also be the recognition of the nature of appearance that arises in the mind. So, even though it's not, you could say the creation stage then is just all appearances that arise in the mind in ordinary experience, except it's no longer ordinary experience because it's not seen as separate, it's not seen as different than mine. So once again, we're back to the union of creation and completion, but without any of the characteristics of the practice. That was more just an answer to Suvansh's question. I think I've rattled on enough about this. So to summarize, the program revolves around beginning with a commitment to engage in calm abiding practice with particular objects for a year, and to do some Chenrezig practice, to engage in some taking and sending, and some other prayers, some aspiration prayers that go along with these things. And if you want to start in on the foundation practice, the longer practice. So that's kind of where it starts, then it evolves from there. So I'll stop.
I think one thing I'd like to add is that Kempo Lodro Donyo, when he was here, also continued this sense of evolving by when the teachers met with him, saying to us, and it was a potent statement, and it was so filled with kindness and wisdom, I felt. And he said, you know, I, Kempo Lodro Donya, don't know the Western mind. I don't know the Western culture. You know it. Talking to all of us, you know it. And you know Dharma, so you make it work. You know, and
Thanks,
of
Kempo.
course he's also saying it is scary, but it also is freeing, because as Bill said, when some of us came, like I came in the mid-90s, bumping into Buddhism, finally some seed ripening, the method was, your teacher says do it. You don't really question, even though you have tons of questions, and you just do it. But the issue was, as Bill pointed out, and Bokar Rinpoche was open to looking at, many just disappeared. I mean, people came one time, and one retreat, you didn't ever see them again. So some had karma to be able to access that method, but for a lot of people it was just way too daunting. You know, Westerners were not so hierarchical, you know, they tell me to do it, I obey. We have a lot of questions, and we have a lot of, and I'm not criticizing that, we have very bright minds. That's why a lot of the Tibetan teachers were as I understand from Thubten Chodron, one of my root gurus, Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa, were quite excited about teaching Westerners, because they said they're really smart. They're really smart. They already gone to college. They already know how to read. They know how to write. They know how to think. They know how to question. So yeah, they're crazy otherwise, but because frankly, a lot of Tibetan lamas I heard were saying to people like Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa, why are you going to go teach these drug-crazed hippies? You know,
Barbarians.
I mean, yeah, the barbarians, which classically, certain countries, we were called not a central country, not Buddhist, where the barbarians live. Now, some bodhisattvas have a pledge to go where the barbarians live and bring the Dharma there. So we lucked out. We got some lamas that said, I'll do that. So we're, as I'm just reaffirming what Bill said, we're in this evolutionary stage, which Buddhism always is, because it's alive. We are Buddhism, right? So it's not a thing that everybody's got to step into, thank goodness. And so I'm somewhat describing our own situation here. We learned it different than we need to teach it. And so we're working on that, along with you. I mean, this is not us and you. We're all learning this together, how to do this. And it's so, I don't know, I'm so excited about it, because to be able to involved in bringing the Dharma anywhere to anyone is like, what more better thing could one do? And we're doing this together. So probably questions?
Actually, what I'd like to do is just take a very short break, and maybe let's do this break in silence so it will be shorter, and then we can have some questions, and then finish up by talking a little bit about what the seminar itself is like. So maybe just a more brief break, since there's not too much time left, but in silence.